in this bill, we will support it to committee stage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise on behalf of New Zealand First and on behalf of my colleague Fletcher Tabato to make a reasonably brief statement on this taxation annual rates for 2017-18 employment and investment income and remedial matters bill. And pleased, as Mr Bailey was, Mr Speaker, not necessarily ecstatic. The tax bills are not something that we generally get excited about, which is kind of anachronistic because they are a major part of the business that this House concerns itself with. And members of the public watching do, I think, have to have confidence that in amongst all the other shenanigans that go on, particularly during an election year and particularly in budget week, Parliament is actually debating matters that do affect them and have the potential to affect them seriously. And tax and revenue is one of those issues, Mr Speaker. I do want to pick up on something that my colleague Mr Coates mentioned with regards to considerations around remediation of and decommissioning of oil, mining and so forth. I think certainly very valid observations, Mr Speaker, but we do have to be cognisant that in the grand scheme of things, such operations can run for decades, and the cost of cleaning up, decommissioning, remediating has to really be seen, if it's going to be done, if it's going to be, as the concern was raised, carried out by the private corporate in question that has profited from the undertaking. The cost of that decommissioning and cleaning up has to be taken as part of an overall view of the costs and losses and profits of that operation over its lifetime. So it's important that whilst we're not seen to be being favouring foreign corporations, we also have to be fair to them because, like any other business operation, the scale, the nature, the scope, the time frame of their business, of the undertaking and so forth has to be taken into account. And many businesses that run for generations, such as farms and so forth, do have annual costs and so forth, but they don't then have a 50 or 70-year decommissioning period. So that's an important aspect that will be examined in Select Committee. And I'm not a member of that committee, Mr Speaker, but I know that members from across the House will be very keenly investigating the submissions from concerned people, both those who support a more aggressive approach and those who perhaps take a more conciliatory view based on the long-term nature of those businesses. So, going back to brass tacks, Mr Speaker, one of the important matters of this bill is that it does set the annual rates for 2017-18, and as Mr Coates pointed out, the last one of these bills that we passed, I'm not sure it was quite in the nick of time. I think it was actually a little bit late, but it squeaked through, and we do have to dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure that the legislation under which government operates and sets tax rates and collects revenue is backed by the appropriate rules being in place at the right time. So it's a necessary thing to be doing, Mr Speaker. And in a general sense, we have no major issues with the broad aspects of this bill. We will be supporting it to Select Committee. It's unlikely, we feel at this point, that much will crop up to give us concern to the point that we would withdraw our support for it. But as with any bill of this nature, there will be details that come to light, there will be suggestions made, there will be perhaps things that even the officials, despite all their many hours of work in the background, perhaps haven't considered, and there will be tweaks and refinements that can be made to it. And at the end of the day, with input, with reason, and with support from across the House, we will, I'm sure, end up with a bill that is fit for purpose and one that takes us forward. And that's important because when we look at the criteria against which the options for change that are outlined in this bill have been assessed, quite simple: fairness and equity, efficiency of compliance administration, sustainability of tax and income-related social policy, and a basis for improved social policy and other government services, all of which are fine goals, Mr Speaker, and we support them. And I'm intrigued by this statement that pretty much seems a summation of the way that we need to approach these things, in which this bill appears to. Under the heading Proposed Changes to PAYE and GST, simply says taxpayers need a tax system that is easy to comply with, so it's easy to get it right. And I think that's true, Mr Speaker. Taxpayers, everyone grumbles a little bit and resents paying tax, but I think people understand that if it's a fair amount collected in the right way, although they might not always agree with the way in which various governments spend tax revenue, they do accept and understand that we, all of us here, voters and taxpayers, have a stake in the nation, and we do have a responsibility to pay our share. And if that is fair and done simply and equitably, and in a way which does keep up with changing workforce types and with changing technology, then people are more inclined to accept that. I do have a concern, and as I say, I'm not on the Select Committee, but with some of the figures that have come out as a result of this that I wasn't aware of the top of my head, Mr Speaker, that PAYE raises 37% of tax revenue and GST raises 36%. And that's 2/3 of the total government revenue, Mr Speaker, coming from essentially people who, notwithstanding that there are many well-paid individuals in the PAYE system, but 2/3 of that tax coming from sources that don't involve corporates. And of course we've seen a lot of conversation in the media just of late about particularly foreign corporations and not the amount of tax they pay, but the amount of tax they don't pay. And I'm hoping that bills of this type and the structure that comes about through their passing, transparency, adoption of technology, will make it an easier task for the nation to have a look at the structure of how foreign corporates are taxed, and perhaps we can learn some lessons from the way that this bill goes through the Select Committee process, by which those concerns can be addressed again in a manner, as I said, relating to, as the earlier example, decommissioning of oil and mining operations and so forth, that we can look at those in a more long-term, broad-spectrum light, and that they will also come to find a way in which they can see a simple track through the tax system and be motivated, shall we say, to provide a fairer share of government revenue relative to the amount of business that they do. So, with those comments, Mr Speaker, I don't wish to tie up too much of the time of the House. As I say, we will be supporting this bill through Select Committee and very probably beyond, and I imagine that my colleague will be very much looking forward to going through that process in the committee. So I commend this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Brett Hutt. Rise in support of the